Do you know when courage is born? It's not when fear disappears. It's when fear still screams, but you choose to listen to another voice. This is the true story of a group of soldiers who answered a suicide call in the middle of the night to rescue trapped comrades, with no reinforcements, no guarantee of return, no promises of medals, with only one unshakable conviction: no one gets left behind. They weren't the strongest, nor the most prepared, but they had something the manual doesn't teach: loyalty above logic. When everything fell apart, crossfire, impossible decisions, lives hanging by a thread, they chose to continue. And at the most critical moment, when the natural instinct would be to run, they stayed. Because there is a moment in the midst of chaos when the world freezes, and in that moment, fear disappears. Not because it ceases to exist, but because duty speaks louder. The base was silent. Not the peaceful silence, but the one filled with omens, with clocks ticking away as if they were scratching time. It was almost 3 in the morning when the radio burst over the loudspeaker. Bravo team surrounded. No supplies, no evacuation. Estimated time to survive, 90 minutes. The message fell like a stone into the platoon's heart. The commander hesitated. The map was clear. Intense fire zone. Territory taken. Almost no chance of rescue without casualties. But before any official order was given, a group of soldiers stood up, without looking at each other, without consultation. They just stood up, as if their bodies knew what their minds could not yet explain. Ahead of them, a young sergeant, his face firm and his eyes burning with understanding. He said only one sentence: "No one gets left behind." They had no obligation. They were out of the schedule. Some had already served their mission that day. But there was something that overcame fatigue and fear: the code. The invisible code that unites those who share the battlefield. It wasn't just camaraderie, it was real affection. It was the kind of silent love that arises between people who have bled together. The commander looked into the sergeant's eyes and, even without speaking, understood. There was a determination there that no rank could contain. Volunteer mission. "Do you know what you're doing?" he asked, and the sergeant responded with a slight nod. It was as if to say, "We know we could die, but we know even more that we can't live carrying the burden of not trying." That was when it all began. The impossible rescue under fire. An act of altruism that would change the lives of everyone there forever. The helicopter was hastily prepared. The lights were turned off, the plan adjusted in seconds. Each one carried a bit of fear on their faces. Yes, it was there. But it was overshadowed by something greater. Courage, mutual trust, the stubborn hope that arises when the heart chooses the life of the other as a priority. They knew the risks, but they also knew that the greatest risk was returning to base, with empty hands and a broken soul. There were no words on board, only firm looks, heavy breathing, and a whispered prayer from one of the youngest: "Let us come back." In that moment, as the helicopter gained altitude, one of the most powerful stories of resilience and kindness in a war zone was born. A mission that would surpass protocol, fear, and even time. And when the first obstacles appeared, that would be when the instinct to not give up would show its fiercest face. The helicopter cut through the dark sky like a blade of urgency. Inside, the faces illuminated by the emergency lights revealed more than tension. They revealed the raw humanity of those about to risk their own lives for someone else's. A younger soldier stared at the metal floor. He whispered, "This is suicide." Another clutched the amulet hanging around his neck. The silence was heavy until the commander leading them answered without taking his eyes off the map. "Maybe, but it's our mission." The phrase, said firmly and sincerely, did not eliminate fear. It just put it in the right place. Their fear was just another passenger, not the pilot. And that was what kept them together, the understanding that being brave is not about being invulnerable. It is about keeping your eyes on the right direction, even with your heart racing. The cabin lights flickered. They were close to the insertion point. Every second counted as a heartbeat. The commander made a final check. Ammunition, supplies, evacuation plan. Everything was ready. But he knew, and everyone knew, that no plan survives the first shot. One of the most experienced soldiers said a quick prayer, while another kissed a photo of his daughter, a simple gesture, profound. It was love in the form of a ritual. There was no room for speeches. The time now was for action. And yet, amidst the imminent chaos, a kind of peace emerged. A strange certainty that they were exactly where they were, supposed to be. Because courage, after all, is a rare kind of wisdom, the kind that chooses to fight for another, even when everything inside you screams to run. And when the helicopter landed, the change happened. It wasn't a miracle. It was instinct. When the tires touched the ground and the heat of the flames revealed themselves all around, something clicked. The previously fearful eyes became alert. The movements more precise. The fear didn't go away. It was replaced by focus, by adrenaline, by the kind of confidence that only exists when the mission is more important than one's own ego. Each soldier descended as if they were already in combat, shoulder to shoulder, without hesitation. Doubt gave way to determination. They didn't know what they would find, but they knew why they were there. And that was enough, because the true power of a team lies in the choice to surrender together, even without guarantees. And it was only the beginning. Chaos was waiting. But now they were ready to face it, together. The ground seemed to breathe smoke. As soon as the soldiers stepped out of the helicopter, the sound of gunfire enveloped them like a desperate drum. They were in the eye of the hurricane. Fire coming from all sides, screams, cracks, their vision limited by soot and black smoke. It was like descending straight into hell. There was no time to think, only to react. The commander gave the signal with his hand, formation in an arc, movement quickly. They didn't know if their allies were still alive, but they didn't. Come looking for bodies. They came looking for brothers, and that made every deflected bullet count. A soldier fell, not from injury, but from fear. And even under fire, one of his comrades came back, grabbed him by the collar and shouted, "Get up! We go in together, we go out together." The code of honor was not spoken. It was lived, in the flesh, in sweat, in courage. The area where the trapped team was last seen was in ruins. Trees snapped, vehicles burned, the ground soaked in oil and blood. Moving forward was a constant choice between life and death. Every rock could hide an enemy. Every corner could be the last bend. But they went, one after the other, taking cover, covering their flanks, blindly trusting in the movements of the next. The mission was simple but brutal. Find the survivors and bring them home. That was what sustained each step. It wasn't pure adrenaline. It was perseverance incarnate. It was the invisible force that only arises when someone understands that they are there for something greater than themselves. With each meter conquered, the tension increased, but so did hope. And when they heard the first groan among the rubble, they knew there was still time. A soldier ran to the point of sound. It was dark, hot, stuffy. Underneath a metal structure, there was someone, bleeding, breathing with difficulty, but alive. The first contact was always the most delicate, because, along with the body came the trauma. The first outstretched hand was like a torch in the darkness, and when the wounded man grabbed tightly, something changed. The chaos outside was still roaring, but inside, at that moment, the first breath of reconciliation with the mission was born. "They came," said the rescued man through tears. "Yes, they came, and they would come as many times as necessary." Because this was not just a war operation. It was a living demonstration of the power of kindness in the middle of the fire. And the next challenge would be even more brutal. Under the rubble, the first rescued man was in critical condition. Metal fragments had pierced his chest, and his breathing was short and intermittent. The team doctor, sweating under his helmet, knelt beside him. With a quick glance, he understood. Either he acted right then and there, or they would lose him in minutes. "We're going to have to operate now," he shouted. The team formed a perimeter instantly, a circle of living protection amid the sound of gunfire, with their hearts in their mouths. The doctor, with trembling but steady hands, opened the emergency kit. With wires, tweezers, and a lot of creativity, he improvised a drainage system. He cut, pressed, stitched, all right there, in the middle of the jungle of fire. A soldier began to sing softly to distract the wounded man. It was the kind of thing you don't learn in training, only in the field. And it worked, because at that moment, the soldier opened his eyes. It was a magical second, a second in which pain gave way to hope. The wounded man looked around and recognized the uniforms. "You really came," he whispered. The sergeant squeezed his hand and said, "We came for you." There, it wasn't just about saving a body. It was about rescuing a link, a piece of the team's soul that had been left behind. The mission, until then tactical, became personal. Every drop of sweat was now a form of gratitude. Every bullet deflected, an act of faith. Because seeing that man open his eyes was more than survival. It was proof that the power of compassion can cross any minefield. The doctor, covered in blood and dirt, just nodded. There was still time. It was still worth it. And even though they were far from over, that moment rekindled the spark that fear had tried to extinguish. In the distance, the radio remained silent. No air support, no sign of reinforcements, but they were there, united, moved by the certainty that no medal would be worth more than that look back at life. That small breath between moans and smoke was fuel. "Let's find the rest," said the commander, and no one argued. It was as if the air itself had changed density. There was now an invisible force connecting everyone there, a force made of perseverance, of love for others, of an honesty of purpose that only arises when someone chooses to continue, even when everything tells them to stop. And the next step was the cruelest of all, making a choice that should never have been made. Because when the rest of the troop was located, something terrible awaited them. The rest of the troop was found among the rubble of an old outpost. The scene was devastating. 3 conscious soldiers with serious injuries and 1 trapped under a concrete beam. The ground around them was unstable. Sounds in the distance indicated enemy movement. A launch drone was flying overhead. Time was running out for them. The helicopter pilot, in radio contact, was clear. Either we take off now, or no one leaves. And there, at that moment, the commander had to face the choice that no leader wants to make. It was one of those decisions that manuals don't cover, because it wasn't strategy. It was humanity in conflict. Save the 3 of them, or try to save everyone and risk losing them. The trapped soldier's gaze stared at them with acceptance and a silent plea for forgiveness. "Go," said the wounded man. "If you stay, we'll all die." But no one moved. No one accepted. The sergeant knelt beside him and said, "We'll only go if we go with you." That sentence, full of compassion and courage, was like a shot against military logic, but it was the only truth that fit there. The commander made the most insane and most honorable a decision of his career: call off the retreat. Retreating with a hole in your soul is not a victory. He said this as they devised a quick plan to free the wounded man. Was it suicide? Maybe. But the alternative was to leave someone behind, and that for them was unthinkable. It wasn't about heroism. It was about loyalty. The kind that comes from deep within, forged by struggles, pain, and one certainty: no one should end a war alone. The weather was merciless. The helicopter circled with its engines running. The pilot warned, "Last chance." And still, no one backed down. The wounded man cried, not from pain, but from shame for putting everyone at risk. But the sergeant held his face firmly. "Look at me. You're worth this." And it was true. There, amidst the smoke, the sound of gunfire, and the crumbling rubble, the purest act of love and sacrifice was born. The mission was no longer just military. It was spiritual. It was proof that honor, when guided by affection, defies any plan. And it was at that exact moment that one of the soldiers, with a determined look, said, "We can get him out, but I'm going to have to do something crazy." And what he would do next would become legend. It was all improvised, no manual, no guarantees. The soldier who volunteered was known for his acid humor, but here, under pressure, he revealed a rare kind of lucidity. He grabbed a piece of twisted wire, heated it with the barrel of his still-smoking gun, and used it as a lever to cut the metal structure that held his comrade. Flames danced around him. The structure trembled. And still he advanced. Each crack of the concrete was a reminder that this could be his last move. "Get out of there!" the commander shouted. "No way! There's not much left," he replied. It was madness, yes, but it was a madness guided by hope. And by something even deeper, the kind of commitment that doesn't back down, even when everything says it should. The structure gave way. With a last effort, the soldier pulled his trapped comrade free, throwing them both to the ground with force. The impact covered them in dust, shrapnel, and smoke, but they were alive. The helicopter positioned itself for the evacuation. The group ran toward the evacuation zone, helping the two who could barely move. And just when it seemed like they were finally going to take off, a lateral explosion shook everything. The engines shook. The helicopter's body screamed like a wounded animal, but it climbed, low, slow, every second an eternity. Inside, the soldier who made the rescue was breathing hard but smiling. "We're still here, right?" The sergeant nodded, his eyes filling with tears. It was the most bittersweet victory of all, and also the most honest. The pilot's radio crackled, with interference, but one sentence came through clearly. "Mission complete. All aboard." At the base, no one yet knew the details. They only knew that the impossible had been done. The soldier who made the extreme rescue, still panting, turned to the others and said, "It was crazy, but it was worth it." And everyone knew that it was. It wasn't just a successful military operation. It was proof that the power of kindness, when combined with courage, can transform fire into redemption. When they descended, no one applauded. No one celebrated with shouts. There was only silence, the kind of silence that comes after a storm. But there was still one moment left, the most risky of all, because their escape had been a miracle. Now, they had to survive the final retreat under a storm of bullets. The helicopter had barely left the ground when machine gun fire began to slice through the air like blades of rage. Tracer bullets streaked the sky, whizzing around the fuselage. "They're trying to take us down," the pilot shouted. Inside, the wounded groaned. The soldiers protected themselves as best they could. But one of them, the same one who had risked his life minutes before, didn't hesitate. He stood up, even though he was wounded, cocked his rifle and ran to the side door. "Cover me," he said, without waiting for permission. He positioned himself outside, half of his body exposed, and began to fire. Each shot was a shield. Each burst a vote of confidence in his comrades. He was the one who held up their chance of taking off. There was no heroic performance, only instinct, affection, and the sincere desire to protect. From outside, he watched the ground slowly move away, but he also saw the enemies approaching. They were in open ground, vulnerable, without cover. One false move and the helicopter would not leave. And then he did the unthinkable. He kept shooting, even when everyone was shouting for him to get on. Just one more second. It was as if the mission itself spoke for him, and in that second that seemed infinite, the helicopter gained enough altitude to escape. The commander shouted, "Now!" And the soldier, his uniform in tatters, jumped in with one last shot. He fell to the floor of the helicopter, dirty, exhausted, with tears in his eyes. "We did it." He said this in a whisper, before fainting in the arms of his colleagues. It wasn't relief. It was peace. The peace of someone who gave everything. And then some. The helicopter finally crossed the safety line. Inside, no one spoke. All that could be heard was heavy breathing, suppressed crying, and the hum of the engines. Eyes met, but no one smiled. Not yet. It was as if everyone knew that the mission wasn't over yet. There would be wounds to treat, nightmares to face, but there would also be stories to tell. Stories of a rare kind of courage. The kind that gives itself completely with no guarantee of return. The kind that is born when duty calls and fear simply falls silent. It was the beginning of the end, but also the beginning of a new emotional journey. Because when they landed, on the base's helipad, the real battle would begin, dealing with what was left behind, not on the field. But inside each one of them, the helicopter touched down with a dull thud. There was no applause, no shout of victory, just the muffled sound of the engines shutting down and the hurried steps of the doctors running with the stretchers. The wounded were taken out first, one by one, with outstretched arms, lost looks, and murmurs of everything will be fine. But no one there really believed it. Not yet. The rest of the team descended in silence. They walked slowly, like someone carrying more than their body can bear. Their uniforms were wet with sweat and blood. Their eyes were distant. Their hearts were heavy. They had accomplished their mission. They had saved lives. But they had left something of themselves behind in that combat zone. And now, they needed to relearn how to breathe. The sergeant walked alone with heavy steps to an empty room. He locked the door. He sat down. He took off his uniform, and he cried. It wasn't weakness, it was humanization. It was the understanding that being strong also means recognizing one's own limits. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to overcome it. He cried not only for the lives he almost lost, but for the lives he once again saw as precious. He cried for his comrade who shouted, "Go without me," and was rescued. For the doctor who operated in the field with hands shaking from the cold. For the soldier who threw himself into the helicopter at the last second. They were tears of gratitude, of affection, of emotion. The kind that cleanses the inside. Outside, the soldiers gathered, but they didn't speak. One put his hand on the other's shoulder, squeezed tightly, and that was enough. Because the war had been won, yes. But the invisible battle, the one that lives in the soul, that was far from over. That night, no one slept well. Some stared at the ceiling. Others replayed every second, every explosion, every decision. The mission was over, but its echoes reverberated inside. And it is in those moments that true resilience begins. When everything around is calm, but inside. The mind there are still gunshots, impossible decisions, and unanswered questions. It was there on that silent heliport that everyone understood. Fear may disappear during the action, but it comes back later, asking for a place in your chest. And you need to have the courage to even listen to it, to even welcome it with kindness, and to move forward anyway. And while the commander wiped away his tears, news spread throughout the base. The story of that mission began to echo outside of there, and the world was about to learn what it really means to fight for someone. The mission, previously classified, was leaked, and within a few hours it went viral. Newspapers began to cover it. International websites wrote headlines like "The Impossible Rescue," "Heroes in the Crossfire," and "The Courage That Silenced Fear." Images of the soldiers disembarking, covered in dust and blood, went around the world. Interviews were requested. Awards were announced. The higher command sent official telegrams. The President of the Republic gave a speech citing the bravery of the unit. But for them, none of it seemed real. They were still processing what they had experienced. The commander was called to present an individual award. He responded in a few words, "I will not accept it. The medal is not for me alone." And he went further. He asked that all the names of the mission be inscribed together. It was collective courage, and if anyone deserves to be remembered, it is those who shouted, "Let's go back," when everyone else wanted to flee. The ceremony was revamped. On the appointed day, instead of a solitary pulpit, there was a long table. Each chair was occupied by a member of the mission. The audience was moved to see the group enter, wearing simple uniforms without adornments, but with firm postures and serene looks. When the commander went up to speak, he did not use memorized words. He took a deep breath and said, "The courage that brought us back was not born in the field. It was born when each one here chose the other over themselves." He received a standing ovation, not for ego, but for truth, for honesty, for a humility that is rare today, and for that very reason, so moving. The broadcast was watched by millions, and on social media a phrase circulated like a mantra: "When fear came, they chose to stay." But the story did not end there, because years later, a final tribute would be paid, not in a palace nor in a newspaper, but in the training camp of a new generation, where soldiers learned to shoot, march, and above all, feel. And it was there, on that arid land, that a phrase would change everything, a phrase that would return as an ancestral cry, a living code. And it would come from the mouth of someone who one day, in the middle of the mission, had been saved. Because more than any medal or speech, what really remains is the legacy. And no one can erase that. Time passed, the physical scars disappeared, but the marks on the soul remained. The members of the mission went their separate ways. Some retired, others continued to serve in administrative areas. But one of them chose to return to his origins. He became an instructor at a military school. His name was no longer remembered in the headlines, but in the hallways, a whisper was enough. That's him. The cadets watched him with silent respect. He didn't talk much. He didn't like to dramatize. But when he opened his mouth, each word weighed like a life lesson. And then, one morning, during a combat simulation exercise, he raised his voice firmly and shouted, "Rescue under." "Fire!" The field stopped. The rookies looked on, confused, but he repeated it with a discreet gleam in his eyes. And that was the moment when everything changed. The expression became an internal code. Every time something seemed impossible, when a comrade fell when fear struck, someone would shout, "Rescue under fire," and everyone knew what it meant. It was more than a memory. It was a call to action, to compassion, to perseverance. It was the bridge between generations, between what was experienced and what is yet to come, between those who were rescued and those who rescue today. The veteran soldier, upon seeing the young men running to form the rescue team, smiled serenely. He saw in them not only technique, but humanity. He knew that the real fight was not against an external enemy, but against indifference, selfishness, and the fear that paralyzes. And in that repeated cry, day after day, he saw his story perpetuate itself with humility, like an invisible thread of love and service crossing time. One night he was invited to speak at a graduation ceremony. He walked up to the stage slowly, with his worn uniform and his eyes full of stories. He simply said, "When life tests you, remember that scream." And he pointed to the wall where it was written, "Rescue under fire. When duty calls, fear is silent." The audience stood up in silence, not out of protocol, but out of recognition, out of gratitude, because everyone knew they were before a man who not only survived the war, but who rescued something much more precious, the ability to choose others, even under fire. And there, on that dirt field, among hopeful young people and racing hearts, the echo of that legacy continued, setting souls ablaze with the power of kindness. Now answer me with an open heart. What would you do if the call came now? Would you retreat? Or would you run straight into the fire for someone in need? This story is not just about war. It is about decisions, about that moment when you realize that you can be the difference between someone living or giving up. And no, you don't need to be on a battlefield to do this. Just choose the other person, even when everything tells you to think only of yourself. There are people around you right now, waiting to be rescued. People who have given up in silence, who smile but sink inside. You can be that outstretched arm, that cry in the chaos that will get back for him. If this story touched you, share it. Tell whoever needs to hear this, and tell me here in the comments, what was your greatest rescue under fire? That time when fear almost won, but you didn't let it. And of course, Matt, if you want to continue listening to real, powerful stories that awaken the most human part of you, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and come with us. Because here duty never ends and fear always silences when the mission is done with love.